I made him a friend.
Wow.
He likes it. Look at
He's got his head in there.
this. Yep. He likes him. It's great. The mountain biomes in Valheim might seem disproportionately easier to navigate depending on how much time you spent in the swamps. There are far fewer enemies, you aren't constantly damp, and as long as you do a few basic things, you're pretty much off to the races. Here are my tips and tricks for surviving and thriving in the mountains of Valheim. I'm Brad from Last Call Gaming. Let's tap into it. Okay, so you've turned Bone Mass into a fine green mist. Everyone calls him the hardest boss fight in the game. You're basically Thor now. You can handle anything, right? Well, pretty much, yeah. The thing about overcoming the swamp biome is that it basically opens up the remaining biomes to you without the same sort of gatekeeping you get from the earlier bosses. From here on out, if you take your time and show up prepared, you can enter anywhere and have access to almost everything, with a few exceptions. So let's talk preparation. The first thing you will need to do is simply find a mountain, and even if you haven't come across one yet, good news! They are the easiest biome to spot. I would recommend sailing a little bit offshore and doing a 360 with your character. See those Goliath land masses sticking out of the ground? Congrats, mountain. So what do you take with you? By this point in the game, you will likely have iron armor, some iron weapons, and a good shield. Bone Mass will have gifted you his valuable sensing wishbone. You should have at least an iron pickaxe, and have access to a steady diet of sausage, carrot soup, turnip stew, and frost resistance meat. The latter is probably the most important. The mountain biomes, like the rest of the game, are very topographically different from one another. Some can have gentle inclines from their base that are easy to traverse, while others will be sheer, stamina-draining walls. How you choose to tackle these are up to your own creativity. You can scale gradually by sprinting up the sides and taking breaks on the rocks protruding from the mountain wall, or you can take a more unconventional approach. Here you can see our stairway to heaven. I by no means recommend you do this, but we did it out of spite, so... From the moment you enter the mountain biome, you'll be greeted with a freezing warning. Much like in real life, you can freeze to death. Enter the frost resistance meat, a delicious beverage that will grant you immunity from the cold for 10 minutes. Basically whiskey. You should come stocked with enough of this stuff to get you through your expedition. There will eventually be other ways of coping with the cold, but we'll get there. It's important to note that if you're wet when you enter the mountains, all of your frost resistance will be nullified. So make sure to keep an eye on any status effects that may be lingering from other biomes. Apart from that, there really isn't anything weather-related that can harm you. The occasional blizzard will erase your visibility, but really just keep warm and you'll have free reign. But bitter cold won't be the only thing to greet you. The new locals will be more than happy to introduce themselves and take your lunch money if you're not careful. You have Good Boys, Angry Burbs, that guy from Fantastic Four, that guy from X-Men, and the Hungarian Horntail. Incidentally, you should be able to dispatch most of these with your current spec, but the mountains will gear you up to deliver a straight-up beatdown to them the longer you poke around. Wolves will likely be your first encounter, and are deceptively tough. They usually come in packs of 2 or 3, and deal a massive 80 damage if they bite you. Parry their attacks and hit them with blunt objects to stagger them, and they can usually be dispatched with a few hits. They drop trophies, meat, pelts, and fangs. You will need the last few to craft armor that will keep you warm in the mountains without mead. The drakes are your nuisance factor for the most part. These flying dragon children aggro you from a distance with a distinctive screech, and deal 90 damage and a freezing debuff that slows the player for 2 seconds if their attack lands. The attacks are easy to dodge for the most part, so strafe sideways and hit them with your best bow and arrow to take them out in a few hits. They drop trophies and freeze glands, which you can use for frost arrows and the Frostner hammer. My guide for the Frostner is linked up above. Stone golems are one of the 2 mini-bosses found in the mountains. They spawn fairly randomly and will pursue you from much farther than you'd expect. From a distance, they look like regular boulders and will rise out of the snow when approached. There are 2 types of stone golems that each have a light, fast attack and a slow, strong attack. The spike-armed golem will shoot a spike in front of him or perform a 180-degree swipe with his arm. The boulder-armed golem has 1- and 2-handed front slams. All of these attacks can be parried with proper timing and will open the golem up to massive damage for a few moments. Golems are weak to blunt damage, so pair a mace or hammer with a nice shield and collect the crystals, stones, and trophies that they drop. The crystals currently have no crafting use in the game and are very heavy, so if you're just starting out in the mountains, maybe avoid fighting the golems if you can. But the trophies do be looking pretty wild, though. The Fenrings are your nighttime enemy and a second mini-boss. These werewolf-like creatures are more bark than bite, but can still put a dent in your health if you're not careful. Their loud, distinct howling will signal their presence, and their jump and claw attacks will hit for 85 and 95 HP respectively. They are weak to fire and recover from parries almost immediately, so dodge their attacks and hit them with fire arrows to vanquish them. There are some familiar faces in the mountains as well. You'll occasionally come across skeleton towers, scattered higher up and usually hidden in the rocks. You'll absolutely want to clear these, as there is usually loot and the chance to spawn runes that can tell you the location of Motor, the Wyvern boss. Having the information to find her will be imperative, as summoning her is a bit of a pain. As far as resources are concerned, there are really only 3 things you'll be actively looking for that aren't dropped by enemies. These are silver ore, obsidian, and dragon eggs. Silver ore is the most valuable, and likely what you'll spend the majority of your time acquiring in the mountains. The ore veins are buried, so you will need to use the wishbone you've acquired from Bone Mass to find it. Equip your wishbone with right-click, and then walk around until you begin to hear a pulse. As it becomes faster and higher in pitch, start digging with your pickaxe, and you should come across a silver ore vein after a few swings. These veins can vary in size, and it's well worth it to dig up as much as you can, as it gives you the resources for some of the best weapons and armor in the game. Obsidian, on the contrary, can be found literally all over the place. It spawns as circular, cracked-looking rocks just all over the mountains in general. You can use it to make obsidian arrows, which have advantages over some enemies, so gather it at your leisure, or use it to climb the steeper cliff faces. Totally up to you. Lastly, there are the dragon eggs, and these are a burden. You'll need 3 of them to summon Motor, and they can be found individually in nests scattered throughout the mountains. The eggs glow with a purple hue, so they can be easier to spot at night if you stand on high ground. If you're lucky, you'll have nests around the mountain where your Motor spawn is. But in the event that you don't, you should consider a few of these tips. The eggs are heavy at 200 units each, and they cannot be teleported. If you haven't acquired a weight belt from Haldor the Merchant, now is absolutely the time. I would recommend designating a base area to collect your eggs for eventual transport to your closest Motor spawn, or create a safe base near her altar to store the eggs you find. If you have friends on your server, the entire process will go much faster, but if you're on your own, this will require a lot of patience. It's worth mentioning that dragon eggs will respawn every 480 minutes or 8 real-time hours, so if you happen to have a spawn very close to Motor's altar, and you are in absolutely no hurry, you could farm eggs, albeit exceptionally slowly. You will occasionally find partially underground stone structures scattered throughout the higher mountains. There's a chance for loot to spawn in the lower levels, and they can make for great starters for shelters and base builds. Here's one we found near our closest Motor altar that we're starting to build onto. So now let's talk boss fight. You've acquired 3 dragon eggs, transported them arduously to the altar, and placed them preciously in their places. So you're good to just press E and fight, right? Well, there are some other steps you should take if you want to make the fight as easy as possible. First, you should come to the fight with at least a huntsman bow, wolf's pelt armor, a metric ton of poison or obsidian arrows, and frost resistance mead. For maximum damage, you can go the extra mile and craft a Draugr bow, link above for that one. And for true overachievers, you can craft needle arrows if your travels have taken you through the plains. I would recommend a stamina-based diet for this fight, since you will be primarily dodging and firing arrows. Serpent stew or turnip stew, sausages or lox meat, and carrot soup should be your focus for this fight. You don't need the highest amount of health, but again, why not make your life easier? I recommend also preparing the area around the altar prior to the fight. Bring a pickaxe and dig a circular trench around and partially under the altar. Give yourself a ramp at the highest point of the altar to exit or jump out of the trench. The reason for this will become apparent after you summon Motor. In the fight itself, Motor has 2 attack patterns: fight and ground melee. While flying, she will rear her head back and fire a volley of ice at whoever she's aggroed on. The ice will deal massive damage if it makes contact, and will also inflict frost debuff, and slow you if you don't have frost mead already equipped. It will leave behind icicles on anything it touches, that you can break with arrows or melee weapons. I used arrows, but melee would be better for, resource consumption. Her ground attack has the ability to one-shot you if she can hit you, and thus the beauty of the trench. If dug correctly, you will have cover from her ice attack and confuse her melee mechanic. She will be unable to hit you, giving you the opportunity to farm the ever-living Smaug out of her. Unleash a volley of hellfire at her, and you'll have her vanquished in no time. Motor drops dragon tears, which will enable you to build a majestic artisan table. This unlocks the loom for spinning silk, a windmill for processing barley, and a blast furnace for purifying black metal scraps. And congratulations, your journey through the current biomes is almost complete. But now, the game gets serious. But what do you guys think? Were the mountains almost too easy, or did you spend a lot of time there? Was this guide helpful for you, or is there something that you think that I missed? Let me know down in the comments. As always, if this video did help you, all I ask is that you leave it a like so that it can help someone else. If you want to see more content, consider subscribing to the channel. I stream every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and upload new videos weekly. Thank you guys so very much for watching, and until next time, cheers.
Soon may the weathermen come to bring us sugar and tea and rum.